Hi folks! In this video we're going to talk about the different ways you can apply a 2D texture onto a 3D model. This is often referred to as mapping, and it's a fundamental part of our 3D skill base, both in the modeling and material design phases of a 3D workflow. If you're applying a simple color to a model, you may not need to concern yourself with how the color maps across the surface. But this is rarely the case where a 3D artist relies on a simple color shader for their models. As soon as you need a pattern or a texture on the surface, you need to define how it repeats on a 3D model. A 3D model has within it information that tells a material how to map across its surface. This is referred to as a UV layout. When you create a material, you can map it to a UV or assign it a simple mapping method, often referred to as a projection. These simple projection methods typically include cubic, spherical, cylindrical, planar, and there are others. Cubic projects the material onto the object from 3 points of view. Spherical attempts to wrap the material around the surface like a globe. Cylindrical wraps the surface with the material only in 2 directions, like the label on a bottle. And planar simply projects the material onto the surface from its normal direction. There is also a very useful mapping technique called camera mapping or projection mapping, where you can assign a camera in the scene to project an image onto a mesh that will always align to that camera. This is used a lot in visual effects and compositing for big films and animation. This is what a typical unwrapped 3D model looks like, with the UVs on the left side and the model on the right side. You can see the highlighted green edges indicate where the seams are cut for the UV projection to create separate sections in the UV, also referred to as UV islands. These islands are then flattened to a 2D surface. UV maps travel with the 3D model. UV mapping is its own area of expertise to create optimally unwrapped models that don't waste space in the texture, but still allow the room and gaps between the islands to reduce the chances of overlap. That being said, sections of the model can intentionally overlap on top of one another in the UV space, meaning that when you paint on one part of the model, it will paint the overlapping parts simultaneously. UV unwrapped models are most commonly used in the most important objects or characters in the scene, called hero objects, as well as some of the more complex background objects like furniture. However, many objects, especially in the environment, utilize standard mapping techniques and tiling, and that's what's shown here. Notice the objects in the UV space are overlapping because the wood grain is tiling across the surface. Technically, a tiled material is its own form of UV mapping in a way. When you open up an object that has a tiled material, the UV layout may look very confusing because all the polygons overlap. That's not necessarily a bad thing, and it can simplify our workflow quite a bit. As its name implies, tiled material simply repeats an image infinitely over the surface at a defined scale, as long as we manage the tiling so it's not obvious. We can do that by combining different tiling materials, overlaying materials, and scaling the materials so that any given view of the tiling pattern isn't visible. Somewhere in between UVing and tiling a texture is a technique called trimming a texture. You may have already heard the term trim sheet used to describe a texture. This technique tiles and repeats portions of an image onto the polygons of the model. It requires placing and aligning the polygons perfectly in the UV space so that they tile and lay out on the model in a perfect way. This technique is very common in environment design workflows for games where an object has a set of consistent pattern details and get reused on the objects. It's become more and more common, and you can expect a wealth of tools and plugins to become available to help you lay out trims on a model. It does require you to be more precise about your edge flow and topology in a model, because you might need edges to repeat trims appropriately. So that's some of the different ways you can apply a 2D texture onto a 3D model. You may not use these projection methods all of the time, but when you do, it helps to have an understanding of their differences. All right, stay inspired, work well, and I'll see you next time.